The most dangerous lies are not the ones spoken in anger, but the ones whispered into a camera lens while the person who loves you sleeps in the next room. Mark realized his marriage was dying not with a bang, but with the soft, artificial glow of a ring light seeping from under the guest room door at 2 a.m. He stood in the hallway of their Seattle apartment, a glass of water sweating in his hand. The rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows, a rhythmic drumming that usually helped him sleep, but tonight the house felt too quiet and too loud all at once. Mark was a landscape architect, a man who built stability out of earth and stone. He understood foundations. He knew how to spot a hairline fracture in concrete before the whole structure gave way. But looking at that sliver of light under the door, he felt a fissure opening up beneath his feet that he couldn't engineer his way out of. Ilara called it her sanctuary. When they married 11 months ago, she had presented herself as a fragile, introverted artist who needed space to create. Mark had respected that. He had funded that. He had converted the second bedroom into a studio, soundproofed the walls at her request, and bought the high-end camera equipment she claimed she needed to photograph her paintings. Yet there were no paintings. The canvases stacked in the corner remained white, gathering dust. The only thing Ilara created was content. Mark took a sip of water, the cold liquid doing nothing to settle the acid in his stomach. Earlier that evening, dinner had been a study in isolation. He had made risotto, her favorite, but she had spent the entire meal scrolling, her thumb flicking upward in a hypnotic, unending rhythm. When he asked her about her day, she offered a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just talking to the community, Mark. They need me. A lot of them are going through hard times." "You spend more time with the community than you do with your husband," Mark had said, trying to keep the tone light, though the resentment was heavy on his tongue. "Don't start," she had snapped, the fragile artist mask slipping to reveal a flash of cold irritation. "You know I'm an empath. I can't just turn it off." Now, standing in the hallway, Mark moved closer to the door. He didn't want to be the jealous husband. He didn't want to be the man pressing his ear against the wood. But the silence from within was broken by a voice he barely recognized. It was Ilara's voice, but pitched higher, breathless, trembling with a sorrow he hadn't seen her display in months. "I don't know if I can make it through the week, guys. The atmosphere here, it's suffocating. He checks the mileage on the car. He questions every receipt." Mark froze. The water glass nearly slipped from his grip. He checked the mileage because the lease agreement had a limit, a standard practice he'd explained to her 3 times. He questioned receipts because last month, $3,000 had vanished from their joint savings account, labeled only as consulting fees. I feel so trapped," Ilara's voice continued, a perfectly crafted sob catching in her throat. "Thank you for the super chat, Freebird22. You have no idea how much that helps. I'm saving every penny. One day, I'll be free." Mark stepped back, the breath knocked out of him. She wasn't talking to a friend. She was broadcasting. And the narrative she was spinning wasn't just a complaint. It was a character assassination. He felt a sudden wave of dizziness, a disconnect between the reality of their life, the life where he paid her student loans, funded her lifestyle, and walked on eggshells to accommodate her anxiety, and the fiction she was selling to strangers. He retreated to the master bedroom, placing the glass on the nightstand with a trembling hand. He sat on the edge of the bed, the expensive mattress feeling like quicksand. He needed to confront her. He needed to kick the door down and demand to know why she was painting him as a jailer. But his instinct as an architect kicked in. You don't start demolition until you've surveyed the site. If she was saying this publicly, how deep did the lie go? His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a late notification from his bank app. He picked it up, expecting the usual subscription renewal. Transaction alert, $450. The Omni Hotel, downtown, 11:42 p.m. Mark stared at the screen. Alara was in the other room. He was here. The Omni Hotel was across town. A second notification followed immediately. Transaction alert, $120. Room service/bar, the Omni Hotel. The pieces of the fracture didn't fit. Unless she wasn't alone in this. Unless the money she was saving to be free wasn't sitting in a savings account but was funding someone else entirely. Alara wasn't just lying to her audience about him, she was lying to him about everything else. Mark looked back at the closed door of the master bedroom, the blue light from the hallway spilling in like toxic waste. He didn't confront her. He didn't scream. He simply turned off his phone screen, laid back in the dark, and stared at the ceiling. The man who built foundations realized he had built his life on a sinkhole. Tomorrow he wouldn't be the husband, he would be the observer, and he would watch the show until he understood exactly how the script ended. Morning in Seattle arrived with a slate-gray sky that matched the numbness spreading through Mark's chest. He lay still for a long time, listening to the rhythm of Alara's breathing beside him. It was deep and untroubled, the sleep of the innocent, or the thoroughly practiced. He slipped out of bed, moving with the quiet precision of a ghost in his own home. In the kitchen, the stainless steel appliances gleamed cold and sterile. He made coffee, black, skipping the frother he usually used to make Alara her morning latte. The ritual of service had ended. Sitting at the island, Mark opened his laptop. The notifications from the night before were still there, glowing accusations on his screen. The Omni Hotel. He pulled up the credit card portal. The card used was an authorized user card he had given her for emergencies and household essentials. He called the bank, keeping his voice low. The representative confirmed the charge was made physically at the front desk. It wasn't a hacked number. It was a chip read. Someone had checked in. If Alara was here, in her sanctuary, then who was at the Omni? A memory surfaced. 2 days ago, Alara had mentioned her cousin, Julian, was passing through town, down on his luck, needing a place to crash. She had asked if they could lend him money. Mark, citing their tightening budget, had suggested Julian find a hostel. Alara had cried, accusing Mark of lacking compassion. Mark's jaw tightened. He had said no to the loan, so she had simply taken it. The sound of the shower running upstairs snapped him back to the present. This was his window. Alara took long showers, a 40-minute production of steam and expensive exfoliants. He moved to the guest room, the studio. The door was shut, but not locked. He turned the handle and stepped inside. The room smelled of stale air and lavender plug-ins. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, sealing the space in perpetual twilight. A professional ring light stood like a sentinel in the center of the room, aimed at a chaotic desk. The background, visible to the camera, was carefully curated. A mattress on the floor. Where was the bed frame he bought? Peeling wallpaper she must have applied herself for effect, and a few empty instant noodle cups. It was a set. She had turned the room he renovated into a poverty simulator. Mark felt a wave of nausea. He looked at the main camera, a high-end DSLR. The memory card slot was empty. She was careful. He scanned the desk. A notepad lay open, filled with scrawled scripts, talking points for tonight. The heater is broken again. Lie about shivering. Mark refused to buy groceries. Goal, $500 for legal consult. He ran his hand over the paper, the indentations of her pen pressing into his thumb. She wasn't just venting. She was working off a script. This was a business. He began to search the drawers. Paint tubes, dried and unused. Receipts for Sephora and Nordstrom, crumpled and hidden beneath sketch pads. Then, taped to the underside of the desk drawer, his fingers brushed against cold plastic. He peeled the tape back. It was an iPhone, an older model with a cracked screen. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the burner, the lifeline to a world she kept firewall separated from their marriage. He pressed the power button. It had 12% battery. No passcode. Hubris, he thought. She assumed he would never look. The screen lit up with notifications. They weren't from family. They were from apps he had never used, Discord, Telegram, and a streaming platform called Simply. He opened the text messages. The most recent thread was with a contact saved as J. J. Room is great. Room service is on the way. When can you get away? Ilara. He's hovering. I'll try to sneak out for art supplies later. Did you see the stream? The simps are eating it up. Jay, you're a genius, babe. We're almost at the target number. Just keep crying about the abusive husband and the cash flows. Mark stared at the words. Babe. The betrayal wasn't just the infidelity, though that stung like a physical blow. It was the mockery. They were laughing at him. He was the villain in a play he didn't know he was starring in, and his wife was the director, funding her lover's hotel stay with Mark's own hard-earned money. He heard the water stop upstairs. Panic flared, primal and sharp. He quickly taped the phone back under the drawer, ensuring it was positioned exactly as he found it. He smoothed the papers on the desk. He stepped out of the room, closing the door until the latch clicked softly. He was back in the kitchen, pouring a second cup of coffee when Ilara walked in. She was wrapped in a plush white robe, her face scrubbed clean, looking for all the world like the angel he thought he had married. "Morning, honey," she said, leaning in to peck him on the cheek. Her skin was warm, smelling of vanilla. "You're up early." "Work to do," Mark said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, flat and distant. "Big project." "Oh," she said, moving to the fridge. "I was thinking I might need to run to the art supply store later. I'm feeling really inspired today." Mark watched her back as she reached for the almond milk. The lie came so easily to her, smooth as silk. She wasn't going to the art store. She was going to the Omni. "That's fine," Mark said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "Take your time." He watched her, really watched her for the first time. He didn't see his wife anymore. He saw a stranger, a digital ghost who haunted his house, extracting resources while planning her exit. She thought she was playing him. She thought he was the oblivious, check-writing husband. But she had made a critical error. She had left the evidence in his house, and she had underestimated his capacity for patience. He wouldn't stop her from going to the hotel. He wouldn't scream about the phone, not yet. He needed more than suspicion. He needed ammunition. He needed to see the show she was putting on for the world, and he needed to record it. Mark set his cup down. "Actually, I have to go into the office for a few hours. Sunday crunch." "Okay," she smiled, relieved. "I'll hold down the fort." As Mark walked to the front door, grabbing his keys, he knew he wasn't going to the office. He was going to buy a high-capacity external hard drive and a surveillance kit. If Ilara wanted to be a star, he was going to make sure her performance was preserved for the only audience that mattered now. A judge. Mark sat in his parked SUV, the engine idling in the far corner of a Home Depot parking lot. The rain had intensified, blurring the world outside into gray streaks, sealing him into a private capsule of dread. He wasn't here for lumber or stone. He was here because he couldn't stomach the thought of going to his office and pretending to care about landscape topography when the landscape of his own life had been scorched. He opened his laptop, tethering it to his phone's hotspot. The name of the streaming platform he had seen on the burner phone burned in his memory. Simply. It was a niche site, the kind that operated in the gray areas of the internet, catering to voyeurism disguised as charity. He typed in the search bar. He didn't have her username, but he had a lead. He remembered the donor name she had thanked the night before. Freebird 22. He searched the user. The profile was public, a digital shrine to a single obsession. The user followed only one channel, Broken Wings 88. Mark clicked the link. The page loaded, dark mode by default, with a banner image that made his stomach turn. It was a photo of Alara, but not the Alara he knew. In the picture, she was huddled in the corner of their guest room, wearing a fraying, oversized sweater he had never seen before. Her mascara was artfully smudged, her eyes wide and pleading. The bio read, "Trapped in a golden cage. Artist, dreamer, survivor. Trying to escape a narcissist before I disappear completely." Mark felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. He clicked on the Videos tab. There were hundreds of hours of footage, archives going back 6 months, almost the entire duration of their marriage. He clicked a video titled, "He Threw Away My Paintings." The video opened with Alara sitting on the floor, hugging her knees. The lighting was dim, designed to cast shadows under her eyes. "I tried to show him my work today," Alara whispered to the camera. "He laughed. He told me it was a waste of paint. He said real wives contribute to the household. They don't make messes." Mark slammed his hand against the steering wheel. That never happened. He had bought her the easel. He had framed her first sketch. He had encouraged her every single day. He skipped forward. Starvation tactics. In this one, Alara was holding a piece of dry toast. "This is dinner," she said, her voice trembling. "He controls the grocery money. He says I'm gaining weight, so he's putting me on a budget. I'm so hungry, guys." Mark stared at the screen, his vision blurring. That night, he remembered the date from the upload timestamp. He had grilled salmon and asparagus. She had claimed she had a headache and wasn't hungry. She had taken the plate he made her into the studio to eat later. She must have thrown it away or eaten it off camera, then staged this scene with a piece of toast from the pantry. She wasn't just lying. She was remixing reality. She took his care and edited it into control. She took his financial support and twisted it into financial abuse. He watched another and another. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She described him as a monster, a cold, calculating jailer who tracked her mileage and isolated her from her family. She used the very real concern he had shown about her car lease, a practical discussion about budget, and weaponized it into a story of stalker-like surveillance. Then he saw the donation ticker scrolling at the bottom of the screen. Eagle Eye donated $50. "Stay strong, Alara. We'll get you out." Knight in Armor donated $100. "Buy yourself a meal he doesn't know about." Julian Model donated $20. "I'm here for you. Always." Julian. The cousin, the lover, the moderator. Mark paused the video. The face frozen on the screen was his wife, but the eyes were dead, shark-like, assessing the camera's angle for maximum sympathy. He looked at the total donation goal on her profile. Freedom Fund, $42,500 by $50,000. She had raised over $40,000. Tax-free, hidden, stolen from the goodwill of strangers by selling a fiction where Mark was the villain. A profound sense of violation washed over him. It wasn't just the money. It was the theft of his character. While he was working late to pay off her student loans, she was telling the world he was a tyrant. If anyone saw these videos, his clients, his family, the police, how would he disprove it? It was her word, backed by hundreds of hours of tearful evidence against his silence. He realized then that he couldn't just divorce her. A divorce would mean splitting assets. It would mean she walked away with half of what he built, plus the $40,000 she had scammed. And she would likely continue the narrative claiming she escaped him, She would play the victim in court just as well as she played it on stream. He needed to destroy the narrative. He needed to prove that the abuse was a script, the tears were glycerin, and the monster was the woman staring into the lens. He closed the laptop, but the image of her fake tears burned behind his eyelids. He felt a shift inside him. The hurt was calcifying into something harder, colder. The landscape architect was gone. In his place was a man surveying a demolition site. He started the car. He had to go home. He had to walk through the front door, look at the woman who had murdered his reputation for cash, and ask her how her day was. He had to play his role in her play for just a little while longer. But the script was about to change. She wanted a villain. She was about to find out what happens when the villain decides to stop following the rules. Returning to the apartment felt like stepping into a pressurized cabin. Mark keyed the lock, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He pushed the door open and was greeted not by the sullen victim he had watched on the screen an hour ago, but by a woman humming a pop song in the kitchen. Ilara was slicing strawberries, the sunlight from the clearing storm catching the diamonds on her ring finger. The ring he had spent 3 months' salary on. She looked up, her face bright and untroubled. "Hey, you're back early," she chirped, popping a slice of fruit into her mouth. "I was just thinking about making a tart. Do we have heavy cream?" The cognitive dissonance was deafening. Mark stared at her. This was the woman who, to an audience of thousands, was currently starving. This was the woman who claimed he monitored her caloric intake like a warden. Yet here she was, asking about heavy cream, standing in a kitchen that cost more than his parents' first house. "I think we're out," Mark said, his voice clipped. He walked past her, avoiding physical contact. He couldn't touch her. If he touched her, the mask might slip and he would strangle the truth out of her right there on the travertine floor. "You okay?" she asked, her tone shifting to that practiced, breathy concern. "You seem tense." "Just the project," Mark lied. "Client changes. It's a headache." "Poor baby," she cooed. "Well, I'll be in the studio tonight. I have some commissions to finish. Don't wait up." Mark nodded and retreated to his office, locking the door. He leaned his back against the wood and exhaled a shuddering breath. This was his life now, a psychological horror movie where the monster made pastries. He was living in the golden cage she described, but he was the prisoner, trapped by the knowledge of her betrayal. The next morning, Mark sat in a leather chair 20 stories above downtown Seattle. The rain had returned, washing the city in gray, mirroring the view from the office of Harrison and Associates. Robert Harrison was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in Italian wool. He listened to Mark's story without blinking, his pen tapping rhythmically on a legal pad. Mark laid it all out. The burner phone, the live stream channel, the donations, the lies about abuse. When Mark finished, silence filled the room. "So," Mark said, his voice tight, "I want a divorce, and I want to sue her for defamation." Harrison stopped tapping his pen. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Mark, if you file for a standard no-fault divorce in Washington state, the court doesn't care about the affair. They rarely care about the emotional abuse unless it impacts the children, and you don't have any. The assets, the house, the savings, the retirement accounts accrued during the marriage, are community property. You split them 50-50. She walks away with half your net worth, plus whatever spousal support she can argue for given her unemployed status." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. "She's scamming people. She's lying about me." "That's internet drama," Harrison dismissed. "Proving defamation is expensive and hard. She'll claim it's satire or fictional storytelling. Meanwhile, she gets a payout." "I can't let her win," Mark whispered. "It's not about the money. It's about the fact that the entire marriage was a setup. She's been doing this since month 1. Harrison's eyes narrowed. Now, that is interesting. If she entered the marriage solely to facilitate this fraud, if the marriage itself was the mechanism for her scam, we might have a different avenue. Annulment, Mark said. Civil annulment based on fraud, Harrison corrected. It's a much higher bar than divorce. We have to prove that she induced you into the marriage under false pretenses so severe that, had you known, you never would have said I do. We have to prove the marriage is void ab initio, invalid from the start. If we get an annulment, then legally the marriage never happened, Harrison said, a shark-like grin touching his lips. No community property, no spousal support. She leaves with what she came with, which, from the sound of it, is nothing. How do I prove it? Harrison leaned back. The videos are good, but they're circumstantial. She can say she was venting. She can say she developed the persona after you got married because she was unhappy. To get an annulment, you need to prove intent. You need to prove that she views the marriage purely as a financial transaction and the abuse narrative as a business model. You need a confession. Mark thought of the burner phone, the text messages with Julian. We're almost at the target number. I can get it, Mark said. Be careful, Harrison warned. Washington is a two-party consent state for audio recording. You can't just bug the room unless what? Unless there is no expectation of privacy, Harrison said. If she is broadcasting to the public, if she is live, she has waived her expectation of privacy. If she admits to the scam while the camera is rolling, even if she thinks she's off air, that footage is admissible. It's fair game. Mark stood up. The plan crystallized in his mind with the clarity of a blueprint. Ilara was planning something big. The Freedom Fund was almost full. She was ramping up for a finale. She's an actress, Mark said, buttoning his jacket. I just need to make sure she misses her cue. Get the footage, Harrison said. You bring me a recording of her admitting this is a con, and I'll have the annulment papers filed before the ink dries. Mark walked out of the office into the rain. He didn't feel trapped anymore. He felt dangerous. Ilara wanted a grand exit. He would give her one. He would help her produce the final episode of Broken Wings 88, and it would be a twist ending she never saw coming. Wednesday arrived with the suffocating weight of a storm front stalling over the Pacific Northwest. The air in the apartment was static, charged with an invisible electricity that made the hair on Mark's arms stand up. He knew the schedule. He had seen the notification on the burner phone he checked one last time while Ilara was in the shower. Go live at 8 p.m. The script is The Ultimatum. Mark sat in his home office, the door locked and the lights dimmed. His workspace, usually cluttered with blueprints and topographic maps, had been transformed into a surveillance hub. 2 monitors glowed in the semi-darkness. On the left was his work email, a decoy in case she barged in. On the right was the Simply interface, logged in via a sterile guest account, waiting for Broken Wings 88 to go live. Screen recording software hummed silently in the background, capturing every pixel, every frame, every lie. At 7:45 p.m., he had seen Ilara in the hallway. She wasn't wearing the designer silk robe she usually lounged in. She was wearing an old, oversized gray t-shirt, the collar stretched out. Her hair, usually glossy and styled, was pulled back into a messy, greasy bun. What chilled Mark the most was her face. She had used a matte contour powder not to enhance her cheekbones, but to hollow them out. She had dabbed a subtle purple shadow beneath her eyes, creating the illusion of sleeplessness and bruising fatigue. She was applying a costume. She was preparing for the role of a lifetime. At 7:58 p.m., Mark put on his noise-canceling headphones. He couldn't bear to hear her voice coming through the wall. He needed the digital remove of the screen to keep his composure. At 8 p.m. sharp, the screen flickered. The offline tag switched to a pulsing red live. The camera angle was high, looking down on her, making her appear small and defenseless. She sat on the floor of the studio, her knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly. "I don't know if I should be doing this," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly on the last word. "I'm terrified he's going to walk in." The chat sidebar exploded instantly. "Run, girl, run. We are here for you. Maud Julian. Everyone, listen. Tonight is critical. She needs to get out now." Ilara looked into the lens, her eyes glistening with artificial tears. "He found my journal," she lied. "He knows I want to leave. He told me that if I try to walk out that door, I'll never walk again." Mark sat frozen in his chair. It was a monstrous accusation. She was accusing him of a felony, of a death threat. She was painting a target on his back. If a deranged fan decided to be a hero, Mark could be in physical danger. But he didn't reach for the phone to call the police. Not yet. He needed the fraud to be consummated. "I have a contact," Ilara continued, wiping her nose with her sleeve, a gesture of calculated patheticness. "A safe house 2 states away. But I need to pay for the transport, the security, the legal fees. I need to disappear tonight. I can't wait anymore." A progress bar appeared on the screen. Emergency Escape Fund, $42,500, $50,000. "I just need a little more help," she sobbed. "Please, I just want to live." The donations began to cascade like rain. $5, $20, $500 from a user named WhiteKnight99. The number on the progress bar climbed steadily. $44,000, $46,000. Mark watched the numbers tick up, feeling a strange detachment. It was a bank robbery in slow motion, but instead of guns, she was using weaponized empathy. She was looting the bank accounts of lonely men who thought they were saving a damsel when, in reality, they were funding a luxury getaway for a woman who despised them. "I hear footsteps," Ilara gasped, freezing and looking toward the door. Mark hadn't moved. He was sitting perfectly still. "Oh God," she whispered. "Please, hurry." It was pure theater. And it worked. System alert. Anonymous donated $3,000. System alert. Big Techs donated $1,500. The bar hit $50,000. Confetti animation exploded on the screen, a grotesque celebration of her deceit. Ilara let out a sob of relief, burying her face in her hands. "You guys, you saved me. You actually saved me." She looked up, and for a split second, Mark saw the mask slip. A flash of triumph, sharp and predatory, crossed her eyes before she smoothed her features back into gratitude. "I have to go," she said hurriedly. "I have to pack while he's in the shower. I'm going to end the stream now. I'll update you when I'm safe. Thank you. I love you all." She reached forward toward the camera, her hand blocking the lens for a moment as she fumbled for the End Stream button. Mark leaned forward, his heart pounding against his ribs like a sledgehammer. This was it. This was the moment of exposure. Most streamers had a delay. Most streamers waited for the offline confirmation before breaking character. But Ilara was arrogant. She had just pulled off a $50,000 heist in under 20 minutes. She was high on the dopamine of the scam. She wasn't thinking about technical safeguards. She was thinking about the money. On his screen, the video feed didn't cut to black. It froze for a microsecond, then buffered, and then it continued. She hadn't hit stop streaming. She had hit hide preview. The red live light was still pulsing in the corner of the interface. Ilara thought she was dark. Mark knew she was still broadcasting to 12,000 people. He held his breath. The silence in his office was absolute, but on the screen, the noise was about to begin. The performance was over. The reality was about to start. The transformation was instantaneous. It was like watching a possession in reverse. The demon of sorrow departed, leaving behind a cold, vibrant avarice. On Mark's screen, the live indicator still pulsed a steady, damning red. But inside the guest room, Ilara let out a long, shuddering breath that wasn't a sob. It was a laugh. She stood up, stretching her arms over her head, and kicked the sad beige blanket she had been huddling under into the corner. "Holy shit," she said aloud, her voice clear and devoid of the trembling vibrato she had used seconds ago. $50,000. She grabbed a makeup wipe from the desk and scrubbed the bruises from under her eyes aggressively. She leaned into the camera lens, too close, distorting her features into a fisheye caricature to inspect her pores, completely unaware that she was staring directly into the eyes of 12,000 confused and horrified spectators. Mark watched the chat window on his second monitor. It had frozen for a moment, the audience stunned by the sudden tonal shift. Then it exploded. "Wait, what just happened? Is she laughing?" She just wiped the black eye off. "Guys, it's a glitch. Ignore it. Scam! It's a scam! Oh my God, look at her face!" Ilara ignored the laptop screen, having minimized the window. She grabbed the burner phone from under the drawer and hit a speed dial button. She put it on speaker and tossed it onto the desk right next to the high-quality microphone she used to broadcast her whispers. The ringing tone echoed through Mark's headphones. Then, a click. "Did you see it?" Ilara shrieked, doing a little victory dance in the center of the room. "Did you see that confetti pop, baby?" Julian's voice boomed through the speakers, rich with arrogance. "I saw it. I was banning the doubters as fast as I could. You were incredible, Elle. The footsteps bit? Oscar-worthy." "I know, right?" Ilara laughed, grabbing a bottle of water and chugging it. "I almost cracked when White Knight dropped that 500. God, these men are so pathetic. They want to be heroes so bad." "Well, they're heroes to us," Julian chuckled. "They just paid for our suite in Cabo, and your new car." "And the divorce lawyer," Ilara corrected, sitting back down in the gaming chair, spinning idly. "Although, honestly, I might not even need a lawyer. I'll just disappear. Let Mark chase the wind. He's too soft to fight back anyway." Mark's hand gripped the edge of his desk. The recording software was capturing every syllable. This was it. This was the silver bullet Harrison had asked for. "He really has no clue?" Julian asked. "Please," Ilara scoffed. "Mark is a landscape architect. He plays with dirt. He doesn't look at the internet. He thinks I'm in here painting masterpieces. He's been the perfect wallet for 11 months, but I am so done with the supportive wife act. It's exhausting pretending to like his cooking." "So what's the plan? You leaving tonight?" "Yeah," Ilara said, checking her nails. "I'm going to pack a bag, tell him I'm going to a late-night art workshop or some bullshit, and meet you at the Omni. Once the funds transfer to the crypto wallet tomorrow, we ghost. Delete the channel, wipe the phone. Gone." "What about the abuse?" Julian asked. "People are going to ask questions if you just vanish without a police report." "Let them ask," Ilara said dismissively. "The narrative is set. If anyone asks, I'm in hiding. I'm a survivor. That's the beauty of it, Julian. The victim card is an infinite credit limit. Mark can't say anything because he looks like the abuser. I win either way." Mark felt a cold chill settle in his marrow. It was worse than he thought. It wasn't just greed. It was contempt. She viewed him as a non-entity, a prop in her story that could be discarded the moment it lost utility. She had calculated the destruction of his reputation as acceptable collateral damage for her payday. "All right, hurry up," Julian said. "I ordered champagne. Let's celebrate the retirement of broken wings." "On my way," Alara said. "Love you." "Love you too, moneybags." She hung up. She stood, stretched again, and then looked at the laptop on the desk to shut it down. Her hand hovered over the trackpad. She maximized the window to close the application, and then she froze. Mark saw the realization hit her in real time. He saw the blood drain from her face, turning her pale complexion from a makeup trick into a biological reality. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the white light of the screen. She saw the live button. She saw the chat moving so fast it was a blur of rage and demands for refunds. She saw the viewer count, which hadn't dropped but had actually spiked as the drama unfolded. "Oh my God," she whispered. The microphone picked it up perfectly, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. She scrambled to kill the feed. She didn't just click the button. She slammed the laptop lid down so hard Mark heard the plastic crack through his headphones. The stream on Mark's monitor cut to black. Stream offline. Mark sat in the silence of his office. He reached out and clicked stop recording on his software. He saved the file. He named it simply the annulment. He took off his headphones and set them on the desk. Down the hall he heard a door slam, then the sound of frantic movement. She knew. She knew the game was over. She wasn't packing for a vacation anymore. She was packing for a retreat. Mark stood up. He didn't feel angry. He felt strangely light. The ghost that had been haunting his house was gone, exorcised by her own vanity. He wasn't the victim she had painted him to be. He was the man with the evidence, and he was about to make his entrance. The hallway felt miles long as Mark walked from his office to the bedroom, the hard drive warm in his pocket. The silence in the apartment had been shattered, replaced by the chaotic sounds of zippers tearing and drawers being ripped open. He found Alara in the master bedroom. She wasn't the composed villain who had laughed into the phone moments ago, nor was she the trembling victim from the stream. She was a cornered animal. Clothes were strewn across the bed, not her poverty costumes, but the silk blouses and cashmere sweaters he had bought her. She was shoving them blindly into a Louis Vuitton duffel bag, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. She froze when she saw him in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Mark simply looked at her. He didn't scream. He didn't throw things. He didn't give her the reaction she was undoubtedly bracing for. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. "Mark," she stammered, her eyes darting to the door behind him. I have to go. My mom, it's an emergency." It was pathetic. Even now, with her digital execution broadcast to the world, her reflex was to lie. She didn't know he had been the one recording. She thought he was just the oblivious husband walking in on a frantic wife. Mark didn't answer. He stepped forward, blocking her path to the door. He held out his hand, palm up. "The keys," he said. His voice was quiet, devoid of inflection. "What?" She blinked, sweat beading on her forehead. "Mark, move. I told you, I have to—" "The keys to the apartment," Mark repeated, his tone unchanged. "And the credit cards. The Amex and the Visa." Alara's face hardened. The mask of panic slipped, revealing the sneer he had seen on the monitor. "You can't do this. This is my home too. You can't just kick me out." "It's not your home," Mark said. "It's a set. And the show is canceled." The color drained from her face completely. She stared at him, realizing for the first time that the landscape architect, the man who played with dirt, saw her. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at an intruder. "You saw," she whispered. "I recorded," he corrected. The air left the room. Ilara dropped the duffel bag. She took a step back, her hands coming up in a defensive posture, as if she expected him to strike her. "It was a joke," she said, the gaslighting kicking in automatically. "It was a skit, Mark. Role play. We were just—" "The cards," Mark interrupted, his voice cutting through her babble like a scalpel. She trembled, realizing the wall she was hitting was solid concrete. With shaking hands, she dug into her purse and threw the credit cards onto the bed. She unhooked the house key from her ring and dropped it on the floor. "Fine," she spat, grabbing her bag. "I'm leaving. You want to be alone? Rot in this apartment alone. Julian is waiting for me, and guess what? I have $50,000 in that account. I don't need you." She shouldered past him, hitting his arm. Mark didn't flinch. He let her go. He listened to her footsteps pounding down the hall, the front door slamming shut, and the silence rushing back in to fill the void. He locked the deadbolt. Then he picked up his phone and called Robert Harrison. "I have it," Mark said. "It's worse than we thought. Prepare the papers." The Omni Hotel suite smelled of stale champagne and panic. The morning sun cut through the heavy curtains, illuminating the disarray of the room. Ilara sat on the edge of the bed, her phone in her hand. It had been a long night. Julian was asleep, snoring softly, unbothered by the collapse of their empire. But Ilara hadn't slept. The internet was a bloodbath. Her channel had been banned within an hour of the stream ending. Her inbox was filled not with adoration but with death threats and demands for refunds. The payment processor for the donations had frozen the funds pending an investigation into fraudulent activity. She had nothing. The $50,000 was locked away. The credit cards were gone. She was sitting in a hotel room she couldn't pay for, with a man who looked significantly less impressive in the harsh light of day. There was a sharp knock at the door. Ilara jumped. "Room service," she muttered, trying to calm her racing heart. Julian grunted and rolled over. She walked to the door, pulling her robe tight. She checked the peephole. A man in a cheap suit stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. She opened the door a crack. "We didn't order anything." "Ilara Vance?" the man asked, looking at a photo on his clipboard. "Who are you?" "You've been served," he said, thrusting the envelope through the crack. Ilara grabbed it instinctively. The man turned and walked away down the plush corridor without another word. She closed the door and tore the envelope open. Her hands shook so hard she nearly ripped the papers. She expected divorce papers. She expected a summons for a restraining order. Instead, the bold text at the top of the first page stopped her heart. Petition for declaration of invalidity of marriage. Annulment. Plaintiff, Mark Vance. Defendant, Ilara Vance. Cause of action, fraudulent inducement. She scanned the document, her eyes widening with every line. Entered into marriage for the sole purpose of financial exploitation, materially misrepresented character and intent. Evidence submitted. Exhibit A, video recording dated December 12th. "Julian," she rasped, her voice failing. She flipped to the section on assets. In a divorce, she would have fought for half the condo, half the retirement, but an annulment? Request for relief. Restore parties to status quo ante. Defendant to vacate premises immediately. No spousal support awarded. Marriage declared void ab initio. It meant nothing. The last 11 months didn't exist legally. She wasn't a wife. She was a roommate who hadn't paid rent. "Julian!" she screamed, throwing the papers onto the bed. Julian sat up, bleary-eyed. What is it?" "He's not divorcing me," she said, staring at the wall, the reality crashing down on her like a collapsing building. "He's erasing me." She looked at her phone. The signal bars were gray. Mark had cut the family plan. She looked at Julian, who was reading the papers with a dawning look of horror, not for her, but for himself, realizing the meal ticket had just been canceled. Mark hadn't just won. He had rewritten the ending. The hearing took place in a small, windowless conference room at the King County Superior Court, a setting far less dramatic than the stages Alara was used to. There was no ring light, no sympathetic audience, just a gray carpet and the hum of the HVAC system. Alara sat on the opposite side of the mahogany table, looking smaller than Mark had ever seen her. She was wearing a modest navy dress, clearly chosen to evoke respectability, but the effect was ruined by the tightness around her eyes and the way her hands twisted a tissue into a paper rope. Beside her sat a court-appointed attorney who looked like he had already checked out of the case 10 minutes after receiving the file. Robert Harrison, Mark's lawyer, placed a single USB drive on the table. "Your Honor," Harrison said, his voice smooth and carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We are not merely arguing incompatibility. We are submitting evidence of a premeditated scheme. The defendant treated the marriage not as a civil union, but as a content farm. The video evidence labeled Exhibit A demonstrates, in her own words, that the relationship was a financial mechanism for fraud. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, plugged the drive into her laptop. The silence in the room stretched thin, brittle, and agonizing. Mark stared at his hands. He didn't want to watch the video again. He had watched it enough times in the dark of his office to memorize the cadence of Alara's laughter as she mocked him. He didn't need to see the ghost. He just needed the ghost gone. From the laptop speakers, tinny but unmistakable, came Alara's voice. "Mark is a landscape architect. He's been the perfect wallet. The victim card is an infinite credit limit." Alara closed her eyes. She didn't cry. There were no tears left to sell, and no one here was buying them anyway. The recording stripped her of her greatest weapon, ambiguity. There was no he said, she said. There was only the truth captured in high definition. The judge stopped the video. She removed her glasses and looked at Alara with a mixture of pity and distaste. "In 30 years on the bench," the judge said, "I have seen marriages end for many reasons, but I have rarely seen a union treated with such transactional contempt. The petition for annulment based on fraud is granted. The marriage is void ab initio. The parties are returned to their premarital financial status. Case closed." The gavel didn't bang loudly. It was a dull thud, barely louder than a heartbeat, but it severed the legal tie as cleanly as a guillotine. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was bustling with lawyers and clerks. Mark buttoned his coat, preparing to step out into the Seattle drizzle. He felt lighter, as if gravity had released its hold on his shoulders. "Mark!" a voice called out behind him. He stopped, but didn't turn immediately. He knew the voice. It wasn't the breathy, victimized voice of Broken Wings 88, nor was it the venomous voice of the woman in the video. It was just Alara. Plain, desperate Alara. He turned. She was standing alone. Julian wasn't there. Mark had heard through Harrison that Julian had skipped town the moment the donation funds were frozen, leaving Alara to face the legal tsunami alone. "I have nowhere to go," she said. It wasn't a plea for the camera. It was a statement of fact. "My parents won't take me back after the embarrassment. The channel is gone. Mark, I made a mistake." Mark looked at her, searching for the anger that had fueled him for the last week. He expected to feel rage or vindication or a desire to twist the knife. But he felt nothing. Just a quiet, hollow sadness for the time he had lost loving a reflection. "You didn't make a mistake, Alara," Mark said softly. "You made a business plan. It just failed." "I did love you in the beginning," she said, her voice trembling. "No," Mark shook his head. You loved the lighting. You loved the backdrop. You never saw me. You only saw what I could provide for the scene. He turned away, walking toward the elevator. "Mark!" she called after him, panic finally rising in her voice. "What am I supposed to do?" The elevator doors opened. Mark stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors began to slide shut, framing her one last time, he offered her the only truth that mattered. "You have to live off camera now," he said. "Good luck." The doors closed, sealing her in his past. That evening, the apartment was quiet. Mark walked into the guest room, the studio. He began to dismantle it. He took down the blackout curtains, letting the gray evening light flood the room. He peeled the cheap, peeling wallpaper she had used to simulate poverty, revealing the clean, high-quality paint underneath. He unscrewed the mount for the ring light and threw it into a trash bag. He sat at his desk in the office, the house finally silent in a way that felt peaceful rather than lonely. The external hard drive sat on the desk. It contained the proof, the weapon, the file named the annulment. He could keep it. He could leak it online, destroy her reputation permanently, ensure she never scammed another man again. It would be justice. It would be satisfying. But Mark realized that holding on to the evidence meant holding on to the pain. As long as that file existed on his drive, she still occupied space in his life. She was still a narrative he was participating in. He right-clicked the file. Delete. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this item?" Mark looked at the screen. He thought about the landscape he wanted to build for his future. One based on solid ground, not shifting sand. He didn't want to be the man who destroyed his ex-wife. He just wanted to be Mark again. He clicked yes. The file vanished. Mark pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city of Seattle, watching the rain wash the streets clean. The script was finished. The camera was off. For the first time in a year, he was living in the real world, and it was beautiful.